Welcome to the Click podcast. I'm Dani Watson, a mindset and manifestation expert and founder of The Click, a company that helps women overcome their fears and limiting beliefs to create a life and business that they love. Within this podcast, I will help you get clear on what you want, identify the blocks that are holding you back, transform your mindset and raise your vibration so that you can co-create magic with the universe. If you are looking to design a life that truly sets your soul on fire and manifest more success and abundance, then you are in the right place. Hello ladies! So for this episode, I want to dive into the difference between your intuition and fear. How can you actually understand what is going on for you? Is it your intuition speaking or is it your fear talking? So one of the philosophies of what I teach our students and our clients is that in order to manifest the things, experiences, people and outcomes we want is to act from a place of inspiration. We have to take inspired action. So this is action that feels in alignment. And how we know whether an action feels in alignment to us is through our connection to our inner wisdom, so our intuition. Our intuition is a really powerful way to access guidance on what we should do next. Okay, so we understand whether or not a certain action is inspired action through our connection with our intuition. Now, often we may need the support of experts to assist us in our action steps that we need to take. So, for example, let's say you're building a business, maybe you enlist the support of marketing experts to show you how to grow that business online. But that expert guidance should never be at the expense of your own intuition. You should always check in to see that the action that you're taking feels good. It has to feel in alignment. Now, here's where it is really important to know the difference between your intuition talking and fear coming from your ego. And to dive into this, I want to share with you something that is a really common struggle actually with many of the students that go through the Click Academy, our coach certification program. They may say something like, I just don't feel inspired to take that action. It doesn't feel good to me. When actually they will be saying this out of fear rather than it coming from their intuition. So they're basing whether or not an action is inspired action, not from their intuition, from this place of fear. So let's just take an example here. Maybe the action in question is doing a live video to their audience. So a big part of becoming a coach is actually being able to show up online and share your message. And sometimes one of the things our students will do is create live video. A really powerful way to connect with your audience is through video. And often they're scared of going live. That's something that they're really, really afraid of doing, showing up and actually sharing that live video. And they will convince themselves that this is their intuition speaking. They will convince themselves that their intuition is guiding them not to show up. My intuition is telling me to not do this today. You don't need to do this today. Or, there's other ways that you can share your message. You don't need to create live video. So, it might be, they say, my intuition is telling me not to do this, when actually it is their ego that is kicking in. It's because they're afraid of doing something. And this is often the case, when it's something that you are afraid of doing, it's often easy to confuse that ego, fear-based response with your intuition. So when you say, my intuition isn't telling me to do this, what you're actually doing is, you're listening to your ego. And we want to be acting from the guidance of our inner wisdom, which is your intuition, rather than from fear, which is your ego. Your ego is always going to show up to protect you, to keep you safe. That's the ego's job. But it can often result in you playing small, not fully showing up in your highest power. Let's use another example. Let's say a client is struggling within their business and, maybe they faced a number of hurdles. And then they hear something telling them to quit, to give up. This path isn't meant for you. You weren't meant to be a coach. And they can't figure out if that is the ego talking Or again, it's that fear-based response, or it is in fact their intuition. And maybe you've experienced this where you've been wanting to do something. Maybe it's start a new project, or maybe you have started a new project or new business venture, and you're thinking, something, my gut's telling me not to do this. My gut's saying this isn't meant for you. Or maybe you've been working towards something and things aren't working out for you, and you're thinking, you feel like your intuition's telling you to quit. Is that really your intuition, or is that your fear? And how do you tell the difference? Well, there's actually two things you can do here. And the first thing, and this is really important, it is to recognize that inspired action can sometimes disguise itself as uninspired action because we look at it through the lens of the ego. So let me just give you an example here to demonstrate what I'm talking about. When I first started out in my business and I realized how important it was for me to connect with my audience and to provide value and serve others with my knowledge, I started to explore the idea of doing video. And my first attempt of video was on a platform called Periscope. So Periscope isn't really around anymore because Facebook Live came along, but it was a live streaming app. So you could basically create live videos to share with your audience. Now my ego was telling me you shouldn't do this. And it would have been very, very easy to listen to that ego and convince myself that, you know what, this is my intuition telling me not to do this. I don't have to show up on live video. My intuition's telling me not to. However, there was also another gentler voice in my head that was telling me to try again. And I started to listen to that gentler voice. And I started to show up and do videos. And then what was really, really interesting was that over time, I was not only no longer afraid of video, but I actually realized that I really enjoyed making video content. And now it's actually one of my favorite things to do. I love to host live training sessions inside my Facebook group. I love creating videos for my YouTube channel. So what was something I assumed was uninspired action for me actually turned into a hugely inspiring action. So my first piece of advice is don't judge an action. So when you're trying to figure out, is something inspired action? Should I be doing this? Don't judge that action on whether it is inspired action or not from the place of the amateur. Because then it will always be the ego talking. So what I mean by the amateur here is, something that you've never done before, something that's outside of your comfort zone, something that you've never really fully experienced or allowed yourself to get good at, okay? When you are judging an action step that you need to take from that place of the amateur, it's always going to be the ego talking, right? Because the ego is there to keep you safe. When it's doing something outside of your comfort zone, the ego is always going to kick in and say, don't do that. Don't put yourself out there. Don't show up. You don't need to do that. Stay here, over here where it's safe. Okay? When we step into the unknown, that is when the ego talks the loudest. The unknown is when our fears are the loudest. And then it's very easy to convince ourselves that, oh, I'm not meant to be doing this. You have to experience something properly before being able to fully assess whether or not that thing is meant for you. So let's say you do a video for a whole week, and at the end of that week, there is still that voice inside you saying, this isn't for you. Then maybe you can start to pay attention to that voice. But don't just be blindly led by the ego before you've given something a go. The mistake is to assume that inspired action will always feel light, joyful, and fun. So this is the thing, right, with inspired action, it's action that keeps us in alignment. It's supposed to be light, playful, exciting, but it perhaps won't feel like that in the beginning. In fact, to begin with, inspired action may feel quite the opposite. It may feel uncomfortable, but doing things outside of your comfort zone is going to provide you with the biggest opportunities for growth. So we shouldn't just avoid doing those things because to begin with, they seem uncomfortable. Now remember that action neutralizes fear. So the best way to figure out if it is your fear talking, if it's your ego, or if it is in fact your intuition, is to take the action. Neutralize your fear and then assess whether it is something that you are being called to do. And I've tested this on so many of our students who've told me they don't want to do things. And they've tried to convince me that it's their intuition speaking. My intuition is telling me I shouldn't do this, Dani. You tell us to take inspired action, to trust what our intuition is saying. And my intuition is saying no. My intuition is saying I shouldn't do a video. My intuition is saying I don't really need to share my story. My intuition is saying I don't need to reach out to that person to collaborate. My intuition is telling me not to ask that guy on a date. Remember that our ego is always going to speak the loudest in the moments when we're faced with something outside of our comfort zone. When you take action to do the thing you're afraid of and then neutralize that fear, the ego is then silenced and we can then hear what our higher wisdom is telling us. Okay, so don't just assume that your intuition is telling you not to do something, because in those moments when you are afraid, when it's something that is outside of your comfort zone, it is way more likely to be your ego speaking. So that's when the ego talks the loudest. Now, the second thing is to pay attention to how that voice in your head is showing up. So remember when I said when I first decided to take to do video for my business, and there was basically two voices that I could hear. There was one which was the very loud, ego-based, fear response. Don't do this, Dani. What if you get criticized? What if you get judged? What if you get ignored? But then there was also a gentler, softer, quieter voice, which was nudging me. Go on, you can do this. You've got this. Give it a go. If you fail, it's not the end of the world. Your world isn't going to come crashing down. Just why don't you give this a try? It was much gentler. And I had both of these voices. And this is the thing. Your intuition will always speak from a place of love and compassion. It will gently and calmly guide you to where you need to be. It will send you subtle signs and messages. The ego, on the other hand, is a bit more aggressive in its approach. So, for example, there was one time when I was about to go live on Periscope. And I hit the button and all of a sudden I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I even going to talk about? The fear kicked in and it was this moment of panic. And in that moment of panic, I threw my phone across the floor and just decided, okay, I'm not available for this today. I'm not doing it. It was this feeling of panic. It was a very frantic energy. And this is the energy of the ego, right? It's that feeling of panic. It's frantic. The ego talks with fear, whereas your intuition speaks from love. The ego says, don't do that because you'll fail. Whereas the intuition says, hey, look over here. I've got something better for you that I want to show you. So the intuition holds your hand to lovingly guide you to your destination, whereas the ego kicks you out of that plane before yelling, wait, you've forgotten your parachute. So what is the energy of the voice speaking to you? Because when you pay attention to that, you will start to understand the difference. Is it that gentle, loving, compassionate voice saying, maybe this isn't quite meant for you, I've got something over here that's perhaps a little bit better? Or is it that fear, frantic, panicked voice of the ego saying, don't do that because maybe you'll fail? You want to start getting really mindful of how that voice sounds, and you'll start to understand what the difference is between your intuition and between your ego. So I hope that all made sense for you today. And I invite you over the next week to start paying attention to that voice. Whenever you've got a decision to make and you've got those two voices in your head that you're listening to, it's the gentler, softer voice that you want to start paying attention to. Start taking action, which will neutralize the fear. It will start to silence that fear. And when the fear's silenced, that's when you can really hear your intuition speak. If you're you're wanting to build your own successful online coaching business, make sure to check out Freedom, Abundance and Impact, our free 10-day business and mindset course for coaches and aspiring coaches. To access, simply head to wearetheclick.com and click free course in the menu.